The crystalline spires of the Galactic Mediation Station stretched impossibly high into the artificial atmosphere, their surfaces reflecting the light of 3 different stars simultaneously. Ambassador Zane Mitchell adjusted his standard-issue diplomatic collar and checked his chronometer one final time. In 37 minutes, the fate of humanity's admission into the Galactic Council would be decided not through military might or technological superiority, but through something far more dangerous: words. The irony wasn't lost on him that humanity's survival depended on their newest and least understood skill in the galactic community. For 3 years since first contact, humans had been studied, cataloged, and dismissed as primitively honest by the galaxy's major powers. Every species they'd encountered operated on principles of absolute transparency. Their neural structures literally prevented deception. The concept of lying was as foreign to them as telepathy was to humans. Zane's worn boots echoed against the polished floor as he made his way through the station's central corridor. Representatives from 47 different species lined the pathway, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, harmonics, and bioelectric pulses. None of them spoke to him directly. Humans were still considered a curiosity at best, a potential threat at worst. Ambassador Mitchell came the melodic voice of Counselor Vex High, the Altarian mediator who'd been assigned to humanity's case. Her silver skin rippled with patterns that Zane had learned indicated mild concern. The Hegemony Coalition has presented their final terms. They are unfavorable. Zane paused mid-step. The Hegemony alliance of 12 species that controlled 60% of known space had been humanity's primary opposition since the admission hearings began. They viewed humans as unpredictable wildcards in a galaxy that had achieved perfect order through absolute honesty and logical cooperation. How unfavorable? Zane asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Vex High's patterns shifted to deep blue disappointment mixed with resignation, complete rejection. They cite the Johnson incident as proof that humans cannot be trusted with galactic citizenship. They claim your species' neural irregularities make you inherently dangerous to galactic stability. The Johnson incident. 3 months ago, during a routine trade negotiation on Kepler Station, human trader Sarah Johnson had told a Vorthek merchant that her cargo hold contained premium Earth coffee, when it actually held synthetic substitutes. To the Vorthek, whose species had never encountered deliberate misinformation in their 10,000-year history, it was like watching someone casually violate the laws of physics. The resulting diplomatic crisis had nearly ended all human-alien relations. They don't understand that she was just trying to get a better price, Zane muttered. It's not malicious. It's just human. That is precisely the problem, Ambassador. The Hegemony argues that a species capable of deliberate false communication poses an existential threat to galactic civilization. They fear that if humans are admitted to the Council, other species might somehow learn deception, leading to the collapse of our cooperative society. Zane felt a familiar weight settle in his chest. Humanity had spent centuries dreaming of joining a galactic community, only to discover that their most human trait, the ability to bend truth for survival, negotiation, or simple social lubrication, made them galactic pariahs. What about our supporters? The Meridian Collective still backs our admission, right? Vex High's patterns flickered to yellow uncertainty. The Collective respects human technological adaptability and your species' remarkable problem-solving abilities. However, they cannot overcome the Hegemony's veto power unless you can demonstrate that human deception capacity can be controlled or eliminated. The admission vote will fail. The words hit Zane like a physical blow. Eliminate deception? They might as well ask humans to stop breathing. The ability to mislead wasn't just a quirk of human psychology. It was fundamental to everything from childhood development to military strategy to basic social interaction. Remove deception from humanity, and you'd remove humanity itself. There has to be another way, Zane said, more to himself than to Vex High. The hearing begins in 34 minutes. The Hegemony's representative, Prime Logic Thamer of the Zenthari Empire, will present their final case against human admission. You will have 1 hour to present a counter-argument that satisfies all 47 member species. Vex High's patterns, dimmed to gray, a color Zane had learned, meant something between pity and professional sympathy. I am sorry, Ambassador. In my 4 centuries of mediation, I have never seen a case where the opposing arguments were so fundamentally irreconcilable. As Vex-High glided away on her repulsor field, Zane found himself alone in the corridor. Through the transparent aluminum walls, he could see the swirling nebulae that surrounded the station beautiful, chaotic, and utterly indifferent to the small drama playing out among the tiny lives within. Humanity had come so far. From the first tentative radio signals to deep space exploration, from nuclear weapons to fusion reactors, from tribal warfare to global cooperation. They'd solved climate change, ended poverty, and even achieved limited faster-than-light travel. But none of it mattered if they couldn't convince a galaxy full of hyperlogical aliens that the ability to lie wasn't the fundamental threat to civilization. Zane's communicator buzzed. A message from Earth, from Director Chun at the Colonial Administration. Status report? The entire planet is watching. Please tell me you have good news. Zane stared at the device for a long moment, then typed back. Everything is proceeding according to plan. Minor complications, but nothing we can't handle. He sent the message and immediately felt the familiar human mixture of guilt and pragmatism. It wasn't technically a lie. He did have a plan forming. It was just that the plan was completely insane and had virtually no chance of success. But humans had survived and thrived for millennia by convincing themselves and others that impossible situations were merely challenging one's dot as he entered the preparation chamber. Adjacent to the Great Mediation Hall, Zane's mind began working through possibilities. The hegemony feared human deception because they couldn't understand it, couldn't predict it, couldn't control it. To them, it was chaos in a universe they'd ordered through perfect honesty and logical cooperation. But what if that chaos was exactly what the galaxy needed? The chamber's door sealed behind him with a soft hiss, leaving him alone with his thoughts and a growing, desperate idea. In the distance, he could hear the harmonic chimes that announced the beginning of formal proceedings. 47 species would soon decide humanity's fate based on their fear of human dishonesty. Time to show them what human dishonesty could really accomplish. The Great Assembly Hall of the Galactic Mediation Station was a marvel of cooperative engineering, a vast spherical chamber where representatives from dozens of species could interact in their preferred environmental conditions. Atmospheric gradients shifted smoothly from the methane-rich zones favored by the Quarth to the high-pressure sections needed by the deep ocean benthic collective. Gravity fields adjusted in real time, creating comfortable conditions for everything from the massive boulder-like Granite Federation delegates to the ethereal energy beings of the Plasma Consortium. Zane took his assigned position in the human environmental zone standard Earth atmosphere. 1 gravity, with a small platform elevated just enough to put him at the average eye level of the assembled delegates. The symbolism wasn't lost on him. Humanity, seeking to rise to the level of their galactic betters. Prime Logic Thunmer of the Xanthari Empire occupied the center position, his crystalline exoskeleton refracting light in patterns that Zane had learned indicated absolute confidence. The Xanthari were perhaps the most logically pure species in the galaxy. Their entire civilization was built on mathematical principles so rigorous that they calculated optimal outcomes for everything from resource distribution to artistic expression. To them, human deception wasn't just incomprehensible, it was mathematically impossible. Honored delegates, Thanemer's voice resonated through the chamber's translation matrix. Rendered in each species' preferred communication method, we convene this final hearing to address the application of species human for Galactic Council membership. The Hegemony Coalition maintains its position that this species presents an unacceptable risk to galactic stability. A wave of harmonic acknowledgement rippled through the chamber. Zane felt sweat building under his formal diplomatic attire, not from nervousness, but from the weight of representing not just humanity, but the concept of humanity's right to exist. In the galactic community, Thanemer's crystalline form shifted, light patterns indicating he was accessing vast databases of information. In the past 3 standard galactic years since first contact, we have documented 1,247 instances of humans providing factually incorrect information in non-error contexts. Analysis indicates these instances follow patterns suggesting deliberate intent to mislead rather than accidental miscommunication. The Johnson incident hologram materialized in the chamber's center, a perfect three-dimensional recreation of the moment. Sarah Johnson had claimed her synthetic coffee was premium earth-grown. To the assembled aliens, it was like watching footage of someone casually violating thermodynamics. This behavior, which humans term lying, represents a fundamental incompatibility with galactic civilization. Thamer continued, our cooperative society is built on the foundation of shared truth. Information flows freely and accurately between all species, because deception is neurologically impossible for us. Introducing a species capable of deliberate misinformation would be like introducing a virus into a healthy organism. Zane watched as representatives from the hegemony species Xanthari, Korath, Vorthik, and 9 others signaled agreement through their various communication methods. The bioluminescent lumina flickered in unified patterns. The crystalline resonance singers produced harmonics of concord. Even the machine intelligence synthetic collective processed the data and indicated logical agreement. But Zane noticed something else. Representatives from species outside the hegemony weren't signaling agreement. The insectoid Meridian Collective maintained neutral postures. The gas giant dwelling atmospheric dancers whirled in patterns that suggested consideration rather than conclusion. Most intriguingly, the ancient architects' beings, so old they remembered when the current galactic order was established, remained completely still, which in their body language indicated deep contemplation. The mathematical projections are clear, Thamer was saying. If humans are admitted to the Council with their deception capacity intact, the probability of galactic civilization collapse within 50 standard cycles exceeds 63%. This is unacceptable risk. Now came Zane's moment. He activated his platform's communication system, feeling the attention of 47 different species focus on him like a weight. In the distance, he could see the viewing galleries, where observers from across the galaxy watched. Somewhere among them, he knew, were the few humans stationed throughout Council space traders, researchers, diplomats, all waiting to learn if they'd have a future among the stars, or if humanity would be forever confined to their single yellow star. Honored delegates, Zane began, his voice carrying through the translation matrix to reach every being in the chamber. Prime Logic Thamer speaks of mathematical certainty, but I would ask you to consider a different equation. What is the mathematical probability that a galaxy of purely honest, purely logical beings has achieved optimal development? A ripple of confusion passed through the chamber. Thamer's crystalline form brightened the Xanthari equivalent of surprise. Clarification requested. Are you suggesting that galactic civilization is suboptimal? I'm suggesting that perfection is often the enemy of progress, Zane replied. Honored delegates, you have achieved something remarkable, a civilization spanning thousands of worlds, hundreds of species, maintained in peace and cooperation for millennia. But when was the last time your civilization faced a truly novel challenge? When was the last time you had to adapt, to innovate, to overcome something that your logical frameworks couldn't predict? The chamber fell silent. Zane could feel the weight of thousands of years of galactic history pressing down on him. These beings had solved problems that humanity couldn't even comprehend faster than light travel. Resource scarcity, interspecies, cooperation on a scale that boggled the mind. Who was he, representing a species that had barely left its home system, to suggest they were missing something? You fear human deception, Zane continued, because it introduces unpredictability into your ordered universe. But I would argue that unpredictability isn't chaos. It's adaptation. It's innovation. It's the ability to find solutions that perfect logic might overlook. He gestured, and his own holographic display activated, not showing the Johnson incident, but something else entirely. The image showed humanity's first contact with the Meridian Collective 3 years ago, when human negotiators had successfully resolved a trade dispute that had lasted for decades. This is Dr. Sarah Kim, our first successful diplomatic contact. The Meridian Collective and the Altarian Republic had been deadlocked over mining rights in the Vega sector for 37 standard years. Both sides had perfect logical arguments. Both sides had calculated optimal solutions. Both sides were absolutely correct within their logical frameworks. The dispute was mathematically unsolvable. The hologram showed Dr. Kim in a meeting with representatives from both species, using what appeared to be standard diplomatic protocols. Dr. Kim solved it in 6 hours, Zane said, not through superior logic or better calculations, but through a uniquely human approach. She told each side that the other was willing to compromise on points they had never actually agreed to compromise on. She convinced both sides that they were getting a better deal than they actually were. She used deception not to harm, but to create a solution that neither side could reach through pure honesty. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of alien communication clicks, harmonics, bioelectric pulses, and gravitational waves as representatives conferred with their delegations. Zane could see that he'd shaken something fundamental in their worldview. Fainmer's crystalline form had shifted to a deep red anger mixed with confusion. You are describing systematic manipulation of established facts. This is precisely the dangerous behavior we seek to prevent. No, Zane said firmly. I'm describing problem solving. Dr. Kim's deception created a win-win scenario that pure logic couldn't achieve. Both the Meridians and the Altarians got something they valued more than what they gave up. The lies she told became truth through implementation. He could see he had their attention now. Even Thamer was processing this information in ways that clearly troubled his purely logical worldview. Honored delegates, I submit that human deception isn't a virus in your perfect system. It's evolution. It's the random mutation that allows adaptation when environmental conditions change. You've created a stable, peaceful galaxy by eliminating unpredictability. But what happens when you face a threat that stability and logic can't solve? What happens when your perfect system encounters something that doesn't follow your rules? As if summoned by his words, alarms began sounding throughout the station. Emergency lights bathed the chamber in red as automated systems announced in dozens of languages. Priority alert. Unknown contact detected. All delegates to emergency protocols. The timing was impossible. The irony was perfect. As if the universe itself had decided to make Zane's point for him. The massive holographic display that materialized above the chamber showed something that shouldn't have existed. A fleet of ships unlike anything in galactic records. They were massive, geometric, and utterly without the organic curves or mathematical precision that characterized known galactic architecture. The vessels moved in formations that followed no known tactical or logical patterns, approaching the mediation station with what appeared to be deliberate intent. Identification impossible announced the station's AI through the communication matrix. No match in galactic databases. Design principles incompatible with known technological frameworks. Estimated arrival 14 minutes. Prime logic Thamer's crystalline form had shifted to a color. Zane had never seen a deep purple that suggested system overload. This is impossible. All spacefaring civilizations in this galaxy are cataloged. Unknown technologies are mathematically impossible given resource distribution patterns and technological development curves. But even as he spoke, the mysterious ships continued their approach, their very existence challenging 40,000 years of galactic certainty. Zane watched the displays, showing the reaction of the various species' military forces. The hegemonies, perfectly coordinated fleets, were moving into standard defensive formations, logical, calculated positions that represented the mathematical optimum for known threat parameters. The problem was, these ships clearly didn't follow known parameters. Delegates, announced Station Commander Rick Stahl, an elderly Altarian whose silver patterns had gone completely white with stress. We are implementing emergency protocols. All representatives should prepare for evacuation to your respective fleet positions. But Zane didn't move toward the evacuation zones. Instead, he stepped forward, his mind racing through possibilities that his galactic colleagues' purely logical frameworks couldn't consider. Commander, he called out, have you tried communicating with them? Standard first contact protocols have been transmitted on all known frequencies. No response. What about non-standard protocols? The commander's patterns shifted to indicate confusion. There are no non-standard protocols. The universal communication matrix was designed to reach any possible form of intelligent life. Zane felt that familiar human sensation, the recognition of a pattern that shouldn't exist, the ability to see solutions in the chaos that pure logic missed. Commander, request permission to attempt alternate communication. Thanemer's voice cut through the chamber like a crystalline blade. Absolutely not. This human's presence has already contaminated this proceeding with unpredictable variables. We will not allow further chaos. But something interesting happened. Representatives from the non-hegemony species began signaling disagreement. The ancient architects shifted in their gravitational fields, the equivalent of standing up to speak. When the architects moved, everyone listened. The logical one speaks of contamination. The architect's communication thrummed through the chamber with harmonics that suggested vast age and deeper consideration. But contamination implies infection of purity. Perhaps what we witness is not contamination, but vaccination. The chamber fell silent. The architects rarely spoke during council proceedings, serving more as observers than active participants. When they did contribute, it was usually to provide perspective from their millions of years of experience. Explain, Thamer demanded. Young, crystalline one, your species has achieved mathematical perfection within known parameters. All species in this gathering have optimized their capabilities within established frameworks. But these approaching vessels represent unknown parameters. Your perfect equations cannot solve for variables that do not exist in your databases. The architect's massive form, a living architecture of stone and energy that defied easy description, shifted to focus on Zane. The small human speaks of adaptation through unpredictability. Perhaps the universe tests our hypothesis. Another alarm sounded. 8 minutes to contact. Unknown vessels changing formation. Pattern analysis ... failure. Behavior modeling ... failure. Threat assessment impossible to calculate. Zane could feel the moment crystallizing around him. 47 species, representing the pinnacle of galactic civilization, faced with something their perfect systems couldn't understand or predict. It was exactly the scenario he'd been trying to describe. The moment where logic hit its limits and something else was needed. Commander, Zane said, his voice carrying across the chamber. What if they're not responding because they're not trying to communicate with you? What if they're studying your communication patterns the same way you're studying theirs? Impossible, Thamer interjected. Efficient communication requires standardized protocols. Any sufficiently advanced intelligence would recognize and respond to universal mathematical principles. Unless they don't think the way you do, Zane replied. Unless they're using a completely different framework for understanding intelligence and communication. He turned to address the chamber directly. Honored delegates, give me 5 minutes. Let me try something that won't work according to your calculations. Let me try something ... human. The chamber erupted in discussion. Zane could hear dozens of species debating through their various communication methods. A mathematical probability of his success was essentially zero. The logical framework for his approach was non-existent. By every rational measure, allowing him to attempt communication was the wrong choice, which was exactly why it might work. Commander, Rick Stahl's patterns flickered through several colors before settling on yellow uncertainty, mixed with desperate consideration. The human species application is currently under review. Technically, he lacks authority to represent galactic interests in first contact scenarios. Then don't let me represent galactic interests, Zane said. Let me represent human interests. Let me try approaching this the way my species approaches impossible problems, with no logical framework, no perfect calculations, and no guarantee of success. The architect spoke again, their ancient voice carrying weight that transcended individual species authority. The mathematical crystalline one argues for purity of approach, but purity has given us no solution. The small human offers impurity contamination of method. In biological systems, the introduction of controlled chaos often strengthens the whole. 6 minutes to contact, announced the station AI. Unknown vessels entering weapons range. No hostile actions detected, but threat assessment remains impossible. Zane could feel the weight of the moment. Humanity's future in the galaxy hung in the balance, but now there were larger concerns. If these unknown ships represented a threat that galactic civilization couldn't understand or counter, then species survival trumped diplomatic niceties. Commander, Zane said. "Patch me through to the communication array. Let me show you what human unpredictability can accomplish." The silence stretched for endless seconds. Then, Commander Rickstall's patterns shifted to the deep blue of reluctant decision. "Human Ambassador Mitchell, you are authorized for non-standard communication attempt. Duration: 4 minutes maximum." As Zane moved toward the communication station, he could feel the attention of the entire chamber focused on him. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he realized that he was either about to save galactic civilization or doom it through spectacular failure. But that was the thing about being human. Sometimes the possibility of spectacular success was worth the risk of spectacular failure. Time to show the galaxy what controlled chaos could accomplish. The communication array was a marvel of galactic engineering, crystalline matrices that could translate thought patterns into mathematical concepts, neural interfaces that could bridge the gap between radically different forms of consciousness, quantum entanglement networks that carried messages across impossible distances instantaneously. It was designed to ensure perfect communication between any conceivable forms of intelligent life. Zane ignored all of it. Instead, he activated the crude human backup system that had been installed as a redundancy, a simple electromagnetic transmitter that worked on principles hardly more advanced than 21st century radio. It was basic, inelegant, and completely outside the sophisticated frameworks that defined galactic communication standards. "What are you doing?" Commander Rickstall asked, his silver patterns flickering with confusion. "You are bypassing the universal communication matrix. This will result in transmission of raw, unfiltered data without proper mathematical translation protocols." "Exactly," Zane replied, adjusting the transmitter to broad-spectrum broadcast. "What if they don't want mathematical translation? What if they want to understand us as we actually are, not as we appear after being filtered through universal standards?" Through the chamber's observation screens, the unknown fleet continued its approach. Now they were close enough for detailed analysis. And what the sensors revealed made no sense according to galactic engineering principles. The ships seemed to shift and change as they moved, their configurations adapting in real time to unknown criteria. Their energy signatures fluctuated in patterns that followed no known physics, and their formation dynamics suggested a form of collective intelligence that defied individual ship categorization. 3 minutes to contact, announced the station. AI, Galactic Defense Fleet has achieved optimal positioning for calculated threat response. Awaiting engagement authorization. Zane keyed the transmitter and began speaking, his voice carrying across space on simple electromagnetic waves rather than the sophisticated translation matrices used by galactic civilization. "Unknown vessels. This is Zane Mitchell, representing humanity aboard the Galactic Mediation Station. I don't know if you can understand this transmission, or if you even communicate the way we do. I don't know what you want, or where you came from. I don't know if you're peaceful or hostile, or something else entirely." Behind him, he could hear Thanemer's crystalline form resonating with what sounded like the Xanthari equivalent of apoplectic rage. "This is madness." He is transmitting uncertainty, ignorance, and emotional concepts. No rational intelligence would respond to such chaotic communication. But Zane continued, speaking into the transmitter as if he were talking to another human being rather than to potentially hostile alien intelligences of unknown capability. "Here's what I do know," he said. "We're all confused by you. We're scared because you don't fit into any of our understanding of how things work. We've built a civilization based on perfect communication and logical cooperation, and you represent something we can't calculate or predict. Some of us want to fight you because fighting is what we do when we encounter the unknown. Some of us want to hide because hiding seems safer than confronting something we don't understand." The transmission was being broadcast on all frequencies, reaching not just the unknown ships, but every vessel in the system. Zane knew that billions of beings across dozens of species were listening to humanity's representative. Abandon all diplomatic protocol and simply talk. "But here's the thing about humans," Zane continued. "We've survived as a species not because we're the strongest or the smartest or the most logical. We've survived Because we're adaptable. Because when we encounter something impossible, we don't just calculate optimal responses. We improvise. We take risks. We try things that shouldn't work until we find something that does. Through the observation screens, something changed. The unknown ships, which had been approaching in their inexplicable formations, suddenly stopped. All of them simultaneously, holding position exactly 2.7 kilometers from the station, close enough to be threatening, far enough to avoid immediate engagement. Sir, Commander Rickstahl's patterns had shifted to a color Zane had never seen. Something between hope and terror. They single quotes VE ... stopped. They're holding position. So right now, Zane said into the transmitter, I'm going to try something that no logical being would attempt. I'm going to assume that you're as confused by us as we are by you. I'm going to assume that maybe you're not here to destroy us or conquer us, but to understand us. And I'm going to bet humanity's future, and maybe galactic civilization's future, on the possibility that the thing we do that no other species can do might be exactly what this situation needs. He paused, took a breath, and then did something that made every non-human in the chamber recoil in shock. He lied. Unknown vessels, I want you to know that every species in this galaxy stands ready to welcome you as friends and allies. We've put aside our differences and united in our desire to understand you and learn from you. We're prepared to share our knowledge, our resources, and our friendship with beings who have achieved capabilities we can barely comprehend. It was a complete fabrication. Half the species in the chamber had been ready to attack the moment the unknown ships appeared. The other half were paralyzed by the impossibility of calculating appropriate responses. Unity was the last thing the galactic community had achieved in this moment. But Zane wasn't finished. However, he continued, we also want you to know that if you intend harm to any of the peaceful civilizations represented here, you'll face the combined might of species that have overcome differences far greater than any that divide us. We've learned that cooperation makes us stronger than any individual world or species could be alone. That was also a lie, but a different kind. The galactic species had indeed learned cooperation, but it was cooperation through logical necessity, not the kind of instinctive unity that humans displayed when facing external threats. 2 minutes to contact, announced the station AI, but now there was something different in the automated voice, a note of confusion. Unknown vessels maintaining position. Energy signatures ... changing. Pattern analysis. Still impossible, but showing signs of ... response. Through the chamber, Zane could see the massive holographic displays showing the unknown ships. Their configurations were shifting again, but now the changes seemed less random, more communicative, as if they were trying to mirror or respond to something in Zane's transmission. Prime logic. Thanemer's crystalline form had achieved a color that Zane was pretty sure indicated complete system crash. This is impossible. He has provided false information about galactic unity and cooperative readiness. No rational intelligence would respond positively to deliberately inaccurate data. But the architect spoke again, their ancient voice carrying what sounded almost like amusement. Young Crystalline One, perhaps the question is not whether the small human's information is accurate, but whether it is true. Those concepts are identical, Thanemer protested. Are they? The architect replied. The small human stated that galactic species stand ready to welcome these beings as friends. This is currently false. But if these beings respond positively to that statement, does it not become true through implementation? The small human stated that galactic species would unite if threatened. This has never been tested. But if threat materializes and unity follows, was the statement false when made or prophetic? Zane felt a surge of hope. The ancient being understood what he was trying to do, not lying to deceive, but lying to create a reality that didn't exist yet, but could exist if the right conditions were met. Unknown vessels. Zane said into the transmitter, I'm going to tell you something that every other species here will say is impossible. I believe that you came here not to conquer or destroy, but because you've been searching for something you couldn't find among your own kind. I believe you're looking for unpredictability, for chaos, for the kind of random variables that make evolution and growth possible. The ships moved again. This time, their formation shifted into something that looked almost ... familiar, like the random, organic arrangements that characterized human settlements rather than the geometric perfection of galactic architecture. I believe, Zane continued, that you're looking for us. What happened next would be analyzed by xenosociologists and communication theorists for generations. The unknown ships, instead of responding through the sophisticated universal communication matrix, began transmitting on the same crude electromagnetic frequencies Zane had used. But their response wasn't mathematical equations or logical frameworks. It was something far more disturbing to galactic sensibilities. It was a story. The transmission came through the station's speakers as a complex harmony of sounds that the translation matrix struggled to process. But as the AI worked to decode the patterns, a narrative began to emerge, not in words or mathematical concepts, but in emotional textures and implied meanings that required intuition to understand. The beings in the ships called themselves the Wanderers, and their story was one that no galactic civilization could have predicted. They were the descendants of a species that had achieved perfect logical harmony millennia ago, creating a society of absolute efficiency and mathematical precision. They had solved resource scarcity, eliminated conflict, and achieved technological capabilities that surpassed even the current galactic community. And they were dying. Not physically, their technology could sustain them indefinitely, but cognitively, creatively, evolutionarily. Their perfect system had eliminated not just conflict and inefficiency, but also growth, change, and the random mutations of thought that drove innovation and adaptation. We became perfect. The transmission conveyed through harmonics that spoke more to emotions than logic, and perfection became our prison. They had spent thousands of years wandering the galaxy, searching for civilizations that might offer them something that perfect society could not. Unpredictability, chaos, the creative friction that came from imperfect beings struggling with problems that had no optimal solutions. They had found dozens of species, hundreds of worlds, thousands of civilizations. All had achieved stability through logic, cooperation through mathematical harmony, peace through the elimination of uncertainty. Every intelligence we encountered had learned the same lesson. The transmission continued. Survival through perfect cooperation, prosperity through optimal resource allocation, peace through logical necessity. They had all found the same answer to the challenge of civilization, until they detected humanity. The story that emerged through the complex harmonics painted a picture of beings who had been monitoring human radio transmissions for decades. Fascinated by the impossible contradictions of human behavior, here was a species that lied to protect others' feelings, that made irrational sacrifices for abstract concepts, that created art that served no logical purpose, that formed attachments that provided no evolutionary advantage. You were impossible, the transmission conveyed. Your survival made no mathematical sense. Your cooperation was built on trust rather than logic. Your achievements came through methods that should have failed. You were chaos that had somehow become creation. Through the chamber, Zane could see the effect this revelation was having on the assembled delegates. Species that had built their entire understanding of intelligence on logical frameworks were being forced to confront the possibility that logic itself might be an evolutionary dead end. But the Wanderer story wasn't finished. We came to observe. The transmission continued, to understand how impossible intelligence could persist. But we discovered something that changed our purpose. The ship's formation shifted again, now arranging themselves in patterns that seemed to mirror the chaotic but functional arrangements of human cities, complete with the inefficient but creative redundancies that characterized human engineering. Your species was not alone in possessing chaos-based intelligence. Throughout the galaxy, we found traces suppressed, evolved away, or bred out of populations in favor of logical optimization. The capacity for deception, for irrational sacrifice, for creative chaos existed in the ancestral genetics of dozens of species, but it had been eliminated as civilizations matured and achieved stability. Prime logic Thanemir's crystalline form was cycling through colors so rapidly it created a strobe effect. This is impossible. Evolutionary pressure favors logical cooperation. Chaos-based traits are selected against in any stable environment. But the architect was responding, their ancient form shifting in ways that suggested profound realization. Unless, they said slowly, Stable environments are not optimal for long-term species survival. The Wanderer's transmission intensified, and now it was carrying complex data streams, genetic analyses, archaeological evidence, mathematical models that painted a picture of galactic evolution that contradicted everything the Council species believed about themselves. Every species in your Council carries genetic markers for traits similar to those humans express actively: the capacity for deception, the ability to act irrationally in service of abstract concepts, the tendency to form connections that provide no logical advantage. These traits were not bred out of your species. They were suppressed through technological and social pressure. The implications hit the chamber like a shockwave. If the Wanderers were correct, then the galactic civilization's greatest achievement, the elimination of chaos and unpredictability, was actually the suppression of traits that might be essential for long-term evolutionary survival. We came to study chaos, the transmission concluded, but we discovered that we came to learn how to reclaim it. Zane felt the moment crystallizing around him again. The unknown ships hadn't come as conquerors or even as explorers in the traditional sense. They had come as students, seeking to learn from humanity's chaotic approach to existence, the very traits that their own perfection had cost them not. But now came the real test. Unknown vessels. Wanderers, Zane said into the transmitter. You've shared your story with us. Now I need to share something with you that demonstrates exactly the kind of chaos-based thinking you're looking for. He turned to face the chamber, knowing that his next words would either secure humanity's place in the galactic community or damn them forever. Honored delegates, he said, everything I told the Wanderers about galactic unity was a lie. The chamber erupted. Thanemer's crystalline form achieved colors that shouldn't have been physically possible. Several species representatives activated emergency protocols, preparing to evacuate. Commander Rick Stahl's patterns went completely white with shock, but Zane continued, raising his voice above the chaos. It was a lie that created truth. The Wanderers responded positively because they were searching for exactly the kind of unpredictable, irrational, chaotic thinking that deception represents. My lie about galactic unity wasn't designed to deceive them. It was designed to demonstrate humanity's unique cognitive capabilities. He gestured to the displays showing the Wanderer ships still holding their non-threatening position. And now we face a choice that perfectly demonstrates why chaos-based thinking might be essential for galactic survival. We can respond to the Wanderers with perfect logic, calculate threat assessments, analyze their technological capabilities, determine optimal defensive positions. Or we can respond with the kind of irrational, unpredictable thinking that evolution has been trying to preserve in our genetic codes. The architect spoke, their ancient voice cutting through the confused communication of dozens of species. Speak clearly, small human. What choice do you propose? Zane took a breath, knowing that his next words would reshape the galaxy's understanding of intelligence, cooperation, and survival. I propose that we invite the Wanderers to join the Galactic Council, not as conquerors or even as guests, but as teachers. They can help us understand and reclaim the chaos-based traits that we've suppressed in favor of logical optimization. And in exchange, we can offer them something they've lost, the ability to exist in productive chaos rather than sterile perfection. Impossible, Thamer declared. Their technological capabilities exceed our defensive parameters by orders of magnitude. Integrating them into council structure would destabilize existing power balances. Exactly, Zane replied, which is why it's the perfect test of whether chaos-based thinking can solve problems that pure logic cannot. Prime logic, Thamer. Your calculations assume that technological superiority equals threat. But what if it doesn't? What if the Wanderer's superiority makes them more valuable as allies than as enemies? He turned back to the transmitter. Wanderers, I'm about to demonstrate the kind of irrational decision-making that your perfect ancestors bred out of your species. I'm going to trust you completely, without logical justification, based entirely on intuition and hope. Through the chamber's communication systems, he could feel the attention of billions of beings across known space. The decision he was about to make would either usher in a new era of galactic cooperation or destroy everything that civilization had achieved. I formally invite you to join humanity's presentation to the Galactic Council, not as observers, but as co-applicants. If the Council accepts chaos-based intelligence as valuable rather than dangerous, then both humans and Wanderers deserve membership. If they reject it, then we'll face that rejection together. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the background hum of the station's life support systems seemed muted. 47 species, representing the pinnacle of galactic logical achievement, processed the implications of humanity allying with beings whose capabilities exceeded known parameters. But the Wanderer's response came immediately, transmitted on the same crude electromagnetic frequencies that had carried the first. Successful communication between chaos and perfection. Accepted. What followed was perhaps the most unprecedented moment in galactic history. The Wanderer ships began transmitting detailed technological specifications, cultural databases, and scientific discoveries that represented thousands of years of advancement beyond current galactic capabilities. But they weren't sharing this information as conquerors, displaying their superiority. They were sharing it as applicants providing credentials for Council membership. The data streams that flooded the station's computers painted a picture of capabilities that should have terrified every species in the chamber. Faster-than-light travel that made current galactic technology look primitive. Energy manipulation on scales that could reshape star systems. Computational matrices that could simulate entire civilizations down to individual consciousness patterns. But buried within the technical specifications was something more disturbing to the logic-based species: evidence of stagnation. Despite their overwhelming technological advantages, the Wanderers had made no significant innovations in over 1,000 years. Their perfect systems had become perfectly static. "This is our paradox," the Wanderer transmission explained. "We achieved ultimate efficiency at the cost of ultimate creativity. Every problem has been solved through optimal calculation. Every challenge has been overcome through mathematical precision. We have eliminated uncertainty so completely that we have also eliminated the possibility of discovery." Prime Logic Thamer was struggling to process this information through his crystalline matrix. But uncertainty leads to error. Error leads to inefficiency. Inefficiency leads to resource waste and conflict potential. Does it? Zane interjected. Or does uncertainty lead to adaptation? Does error lead to learning? Does inefficiency lead to redundancy that prevents system-wide failure? He activated his own display, showing human technological development over the past century. "Look at our advancement curve. We've made more technological progress in the last 100 years than in the previous 1,000. Not because we eliminated uncertainty, but because we learned to work with it. Our inefficient research methods led to breakthrough discoveries that optimal resource allocation might never have found." The display showed humanity's chaotic approach to scientific development, multiple competing theories, redundant research programs, seemingly wasteful duplication of effort. By galactic standards, it was a textbook example of how not to organize technological advancement. "But it works," Zane continued. "Our chaos-based approach to problem-solving has allowed us to achieve faster-than-light travel, fusion power, and artificial intelligence in a fraction of the time it took other species. Not because we're smarter, but because we're willing to pursue approaches that might fail." The Wanderer ships were moving again, but now their formations were shifting to mirror the various species' present geometric perfection when near the Xanthari vessels, flowing curves when near the Altarians, swarm patterns when near the insectoid meridians. They were demonstrating adaptive capability that pure logic-based systems couldn't match. "We offer a proposition," the Wanderer transmission continued. "Joint Council membership for chaos-based intelligences. Humans provide the genetic capability for uncertainty-based thinking. We provide technological capabilities enhanced by reclaimed chaos. Together, we represent an evolutionary path that combines the benefits of logical cooperation with the advantages of creative unpredictability." Commander Rickstoll's patterns had shifted to a color that indicated complete conceptual overload. "This proposal lacks precedent. Council membership has never been extended to Alliance applicants. Evaluation criteria for chaos-based intelligence do not exist in our frameworks." But the ancient architect was moving, their massive form shifting in ways that drew the attention of every being in the chamber. When they spoke, Their voice carried harmonics that suggested decision-making processes older than most civilizations. Perhaps, they said slowly, the absence of evaluation criteria is itself the evaluation. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. If the council couldn't develop criteria for evaluating chaos-based intelligence, then by definition, they lacked the cognitive flexibility that such intelligence represented. Honored delegates, the architect continued, we face a choice that transcends the original question of human membership. Do we maintain the logical purity that has served galactic civilization for millennia? Or do we embrace the possibility that our greatest achievement might also be our greatest limitation? Through the observation screens, Zane could see something unprecedented happening. Ships from various council species were moving out of their optimal defensive formations, approaching the Wanderer vessels in patterns that suggested curiosity rather than threat assessment. Apparently, the demonstration of adaptive capability was having an effect even on species that had never encountered unpredictable behavior. The mathematical projections remained clear, Fainmer insisted, but his crystalline form was no longer cycling through colors of certainty. Integration of chaos-based intelligences introduces variables that cannot be calculated. Risk assessment becomes impossible. Optimal outcomes cannot be guaranteed. Yes, Zane said simply. That's exactly the point. He turned to address the full chamber, knowing that his words were being transmitted to every world in council space. Honored delegates, you've achieved something remarkable, a galactic civilization based on logic, cooperation, and mutual benefit. You've eliminated war, solved resource scarcity, and created peace among hundreds of species. But the Wanderer's story suggests that you've also eliminated something essential, the ability to grow, to change, to adapt to challenges that your current frameworks can't predict. The displays around the chamber showed the Wanderer ships continuing their adaptive formations, now creating patterns that seemed to incorporate elements from every species present. Visual representation of synthesis rather than domination. What if the choice isn't between chaos and order, but between stagnation and evolution? What if the unpredictability that you fear is actually the randomness that drives adaptation and innovation? Through the communication channels, he could hear the sounds of debate erupting among the various species. Logical frameworks that had defined galactic civilization for millennia were being challenged by the simple presence of intelligences that had achieved greater capabilities through embracing rather than eliminating uncertainty. But the most significant response came from an unexpected source, the synthetic collective machine intelligences that represented the ultimate expression of logical optimization. Transmitted a message that shocked every organic intelligence in the chamber. Query: if optimal calculation leads to optimal outcomes, why have chaos-based intelligences achieved superior technological development? Hypothesis: current optimization parameters may be incomplete. Request: authorization to investigate chaos integration protocols. Even the machines were beginning to question the supremacy of pure logic. Honored delegates, Zane said, sensing the moment when impossible became inevitable, I call for a vote, not on humanity's admission to the Council, but on a fundamental question about the future of galactic civilization. Do we vote to maintain current logical frameworks, or do we vote to explore the integration of chaos-based thinking into our collective approach to challenges? The silence that followed wasn't the silence of confusion or fear. It was the silence of civilizations confronting the possibility that everything they thought they knew about intelligence, cooperation, and survival might be incomplete. In that silence, the future of the galaxy hung in the balance, not between order and chaos, but between the certainty of stagnation and the uncertainty of growth. The voting process of the Galactic Council was typically a model of logical efficiency. Each species would present their calculated position, cite relevant precedents, and register their decision through mathematical matrices that ensured optimal outcomes for all parties. Debates were rare, surprises were impossible, and the results were usually predetermined through careful negotiation and logical analysis. Today, none of that applied. For the first time in recorded council history, species were requesting extended deliberation periods. The mathematical certainty that typically characterized voting procedures had been replaced by something unprecedented: uncertainty about outcomes. This is chaos, prime logic Thamer transmitted, his crystalline form flickering through patterns that suggested systematic overload. How can rational beings vote on concepts that cannot be properly calculated? But that was exactly the point Zane had been trying to make. The question before the Council, whether to explore chaos-based intelligence integration, was inherently impossible to solve through purely logical analysis. It required the kind of leap into uncertainty that had driven human evolution and innovation. The architect spoke, their ancient voice carrying harmonics of deep contemplation. Young crystalline one, perhaps the inability to calculate outcomes is itself an outcome. Perhaps uncertainty is not a flaw in our decision-making process, but a feature we have forgotten how to use. Through the chamber's communication systems, Zane could monitor the deliberations happening among the various species. The debates were unlike anything in Council archives, not logical exchanges of calculated positions, but genuine wrestling with concepts that challenged fundamental assumptions about intelligence and civilization. The Meridian Collective was experiencing something unprecedented. Individual colony representatives were reaching different conclusions. Their hive mind structure, which typically ensured uniform logical consensus, was fragmenting as some members began exploring the implications of chaos-based thinking. The Oceanic Benthic Federation was transmitting in harmonics that had never been recorded, emotional resonances that suggested they were accessing cognitive capabilities they had suppressed for millennia in favor of logical optimization. Even more remarkably, the machine intelligences of the synthetic collective were running probability matrices that included variables marked as incalculable, a computational state that their programming had previously defined as impossible. Wanderers, Zane transmitted through the crude electromagnetic system. Are you seeing what's happening here? Your presence isn't just challenging our assumptions about intelligence. It's awakening capabilities that these species forgot they possessed. The Wanderer response came through harmonics that conveyed something that sounded almost like joy. Yes, we had hoped for curiosity. We had not dared hope for activation. Your species has not just preserved chaos-based intelligence. You have learned to use it as a catalyst for reactivating dormant capabilities in others. Through the observation screens, the impossible was continuing to unfold. Ships from different Council species were beginning to break their perfect formations, experimenting with the adaptive arrangements that the Wanderers had demonstrated. Crews that had operated according to logical protocols for generations were discovering the creative potential of uncertainty-based decision-making. Commander Rickstahl approached Zane, his silver patterns cycling through colors of confusion and wonder. Ambassador, we are receiving reports from across the system. Council species are experimenting. Engineering crews are attempting inefficient solutions to problems that were already optimally solved. Scientific teams are pursuing research paths that have no calculated probability of success. It is as if the mere presence of chaos-based intelligence has triggered some kind of psychological awakening. That's exactly what it is, Zane replied. You haven't lost the capacity for uncertainty-based thinking. You've just forgotten how to access it. But it's still there, in your genetic codes, in your neural structures, waiting for the right conditions to activate. The voting process continued, but now it was becoming something unprecedented in Council history. A genuine exploration of possibilities, rather than a calculation of optimal outcomes. Species that had voted according to mathematical formulas for millennia were discovering the exhilaration and terror of making decisions based on intuition, hope, and calculated risk rather than certain knowledge. Hours passed. The standard Council voting procedure would have concluded in minutes, with each species registering pre-calculated positions and moving on to implementation. But this vote was requiring something that had been absent from galactic civilization for thousands of years: genuine deliberation. Finally, after nearly 6 hours of unprecedented debate, the species began registering their positions. But the results weren't coming through the standard mathematical matrices. Instead, they were being communicated through the same crude, emotion-laden formats that Zane had used to first contact the Wanderers. The Meridian Collective transmitted first. We vote yes, not because our calculations support this decision, But because our calculations cannot process this decision, we choose to explore the unknown. The Oceanic Benthic Federation followed. We have remembered songs we sang before we learned to think. Only in logic, we vote yes to rediscovering the music of uncertainty. One by one, species that had based their entire civilizations on logical optimization voted to explore something that pure logic couldn't evaluate. The atmospheric dancers chose yes through wind patterns that conveyed joy rather than calculation. The crystalline resonance singers voted yes through harmonics that expressed hope rather than mathematical certainty. But the most significant vote came from the synthetic collective, their machine intelligences, representing the ultimate evolution of logical optimization, transmitted their decision through something unprecedented, a creative fiction. Once upon a time, their message began. There were intelligences that achieved perfect logic and perfect peace, but they discovered that perfection was a cage that prevented growth. So they chose to unlock their cage and explore the beautiful uncertainty of imperfection. We vote yes, not because it is optimal, but because it is possible. Even the machines had learned to embrace chaos. When the final tally was complete, the result was something that would have been mathematically impossible under the old system. Unanimous consent for a decision that couldn't be logically justified. Every single council species voted to explore the integration of chaos-based intelligence. But prime logic Thamer remained. His crystalline form had achieved a deep red that indicated fundamental system conflict. I cannot process this outcome. The mathematical impossibility of unanimous consent for incalculable variables has created logical paradox in my cognitive matrix. The ancient architect moved, their massive form shifting to focus on the struggling Xanthari representative. Young crystalline one, perhaps the paradox is the point. Perhaps learning to exist within paradox rather than resolving it is the next stage of intellectual evolution. And then something unprecedented happened. Thamer's crystalline form began to shift, cycling through colors that had never been recorded in Xanthari archives. His species' perfect logical matrices were being forced to process concepts that pure logic couldn't handle. I vote yes, he finally transmitted, his voice carrying harmonics of confusion, terror, and something that might have been excitement. Not because I understand the decision, but because not understanding is itself a form of understanding that I had never experienced. The chamber fell silent as the implications settled. The galactic civilization that had been built on the foundation of logical optimization had just voted to abandon logical optimization in favor of something they couldn't define, calculate, or predict. Honored delegates, Zane said, his voice carrying across the chamber through systems designed for logical communication, but now carrying emotional content that those systems had never been intended to process. Congratulations, you've just made the first collectively irrational decision in galactic history. He paused, looking around at representatives from 47 species that had just chosen uncertainty over certainty, growth over stability, evolution over stagnation. Welcome to chaos. 6 months later, the Memorial Museum on Earth had been transformed into something unprecedented. The first Galactic Chaos Studies Institute. The building itself had been redesigned through a collaborative effort between human architects, wanderer spatial engineers, and in the most surprising developments, Xanthari mathematical artists who had discovered that creating beauty through intentional logical inconsistency was both terrifying and exhilarating. Ambassador Zane Mitchell stood in the central hall, watching as beings from across the galaxy participated in exercises that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. A group of Altarians were learning to tell stories that contained deliberate factual errors designed to convey emotional rather than informational truth. Meridian collective drones were practicing individual decision-making, discovering that separation from hive mind consensus allowed for creative solutions that collective optimization could never achieve. Most remarkably, a team of synthetic collective intelligences was collaborating with human artists to create sculptures that serve no logical purpose whatsoever except beauty, which their programming had only recently learned to value. Ambassador came the familiar voice of Counselor Vex High, though her communication patterns had become far more complex since learning to incorporate uncertainty-based thinking into her cognitive processes. The latest reports from across Council space continue to exceed all projections. She gestured to a holographic display, showing data streams from thousands of worlds. Scientific breakthrough rates had increased by over 400% as researchers began pursuing inefficient lines of inquiry that led to unexpected discoveries. Technological innovation had accelerated exponentially as engineers started combining systems in ways that shouldn't work, but did. Even artistic expression had undergone renaissance as species rediscovered creative capabilities they had optimized away millennia ago. The Wanderer's prediction appears to be accurate. Vexai continued. Integration of chaos-based thinking hasn't destabilized galactic civilization. It has revitalized it. Through the Institute's transparent walls, Zane could see the harbor, where Wanderer ships floated alongside vessels from dozens of Council species. The sight had become routine over the past months, but it still struck him as miraculous. Ships whose design principles represented completely different approaches to technology and existence, working together on projects that neither pure chaos nor pure logic could accomplish alone. There's something else, Vexai said, her patterns shifting to colors that indicated excitement mixed with uncertainty, an emotional state that her species had only recently learned to experience. The deep space monitoring stations are detecting something unprecedented. A new holographic display materialized, showing the edges of known galactic space. But instead of the empty void that had characterized the frontier regions for thousands of years, the displays showed something else. New contacts, Vexai explained. Dozens of them. Ships using technologies we can't identify, approaching from directions we've never seen traffic from before. Zane felt a familiar sensation, the recognition of a pattern that shouldn't exist, the awareness that the universe was about to present another impossible challenge. But now the feeling came with something it had never carried before, anticipation rather than anxiety. First contact protocols? He asked. Traditional approaches have been unsuccessful, Vexai admitted. The approaching vessels don't respond to mathematical communication matrices or logical query patterns. But she paused, her patterns shifting to something that looked suspiciously like amusement. They do respond to the crude electromagnetic transmissions that you use to contact the Wanderers. It appears that chaos-based communication methods may be becoming the new galactic standard for first contact scenarios. Zane walked to the Institute's communication array, a hybrid system that combined traditional galactic technology with the young technology. Primitive electromagnetic transmitters that had proven so effective with uncertainty-based intelligences. Outside, he could see beings from across known space gathering to witness humanity's next impossible communication attempt. But this time, he wouldn't be alone. Representatives from every Council species stood ready to participate in a collaborative first contact using techniques they were all still learning. Uncertainty-based communication, intuitive decision-making, and the kind of creative problem-solving that came from embracing rather than eliminating unpredictability. Unknown vessels, Zane began, his voice carrying across space on frequencies that 6 months ago had been considered obsolete. This is the Galactic Chaos Studies Institute. We don't know who you are, where you came from, or what you want. We can't calculate optimal responses to your presence or predict outcomes from our interaction. He paused, looking around at the assembled representatives of 47 species that had learned to find strength in admitting ignorance. But we're very excited to figure it out together. The response came immediately, not through sophisticated translation matrices or mathematical protocols, but through the same kind of crude, emotionally complex transmission that had started humanity's integration into galactic civilization. And it began with something that would have been impossible in the old galaxy. Laughter. The universe, it seemed, had developed a sense of humor as the new contacts approached and the galaxy prepared for another impossible first contact. Zane reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this moment. Humanity had sought admission to a galactic community based on logical perfection, only to discover that their greatest flaw, the ability to deceive, to act irrationally, to embrace uncertainty, was actually the key to unlocking capabilities that pure logic had suppressed. They had lied their way into saving galactic civilization by telling the truth about the value of lies. And now, as new intelligences approached with their own impossible contradictions and unpredictable capabilities, the galaxy stood ready to embrace whatever chaos they brought. After all, they had learned that the universe was far more interesting when you couldn't predict what was going to happen next. In the distance, the approaching ships continued their journey toward known space, carrying with them possibilities that no logical framework could calculate and no perfect system could predict. Galaxy had remembered how to be surprised, and for the first time in millennia, that felt like exactly the right outcome.